So I applied to 19 schools, and instead of paying over $2,500 in applications, I only spent $150. Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today, I wanted to talk to you about 5 ways to reduce your application costs. So after taking the MCAT 3 times, applying through 2 AMCAS application cycles, going through 6 interview invites, I ended up spending almost $10,000. And if you're interested in seeing those specific costs, I will link the video somewhere around here. So today, I wanted to show you what I learned afterwards and how I think that you can reduce your application costs. Let's get started. Tip 1 is reduce your MCAT costs. Of course, there's one fee that you could probably never change, that is the exam cost itself, which is going to be $320. Now, the way you can reduce your MCAT is by taking it once and not 3 times like I did. The other thing that you can actually control, though, is your prep materials. What prep materials are you going to use and how much will they cost you? So again, I went with the Princeton Review books because I had used Princeton Review in high school for my AP exams and I really liked the books. I thought they covered the content well. So that's what I went with. Now, you can definitely buy the books online, brand new. You can buy the most up-to-date 2020 or whatever year it is, and it'll definitely cost you a lot, probably $200 to $300. Or you could do like I did. So I ended up going on Facebook, on Craigslist, on some of my university groups, and I was just scouting out to see if anybody was selling some MCAT Princeton Review books. And even if they are 1 or 2 years older, it doesn't matter. The majority of the content is still the same. So I ended up finding some used books. Somebody had just taken their MCAT and they sold them to me. Instead of $300, I bought it for $80. So that was a big save there. And then once I finished using those books, I had to really sell them pretty quickly and get rid of them. So I ended up selling them for $40, which is like an amazing deal, right? So you can save how much you spend on your study materials. They don't need to be the most brand new and up to date. Now, the other thing is, should you take a prep course or should you consider tutoring? This is totally a personal preference. I ended up taking a prep course, but it did cost me well over $2,000. If you don't feel like you need a prep course, I think there are lots of free materials online, free study plans, a lot of people sharing their study schedules. There's so much content. If you personally feel like you don't need one, you definitely don't need one, and you don't need to put it down $2,000 or $1,000 for it. So just weigh out the pros and cons for yourself and make that decision. But these are a few ways that you can definitely cut down on your MCAT costs. Tip number 2, choose your school strategically. Now, let's talk about the cost of applying to a school. So when it comes to the AMCAS application, you have your primary application. Once you fill it out and you submit it, it's an initial cost of $160 to submit to one school. And then for every additional school, you have to pay $38. And then from there, we have secondary apps. Now, the cost of secondary apps is specific to each school. Some schools have charged me $50. Others have charged me up to $120. So it's really kind of on average, I would say $100 per school. Now, for me, I ended up going through 2 AMCAS application cycles. During my first one, I applied to 19 schools. So I sent in 19 primary applications and 15 secondary applications. That led to a total cost of $2,344. Now, through my second AMCAS cycle, I decided to apply to fewer schools. So I applied to 12 primary applications, 10 secondary, and that total cost was $1,578. Now, simply from that 7 school difference, from 19 primaries to 12 primaries, there's an $800 difference. So just by applying to fewer schools, you could end up reducing your cost. Now, of course, there are 2 things that I want you to mainly consider. If you are going to create, let's say, a list of 10 schools that you will apply to, how are you going to make sure that you have the best chance of getting accepted into those 10 schools? So here are the 2 main things that I would consider if you're trying to keep your costs low by having only, let's say, 10 to 15 applications. Now, out-of-state versus in-state acceptance rate. Let's say that I'm a resident of Missouri, which I am, and I want to apply to the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. If I go to their website and I start checking out more about their statistics, I can see their matriculant statistics from the past. So there's a frequently asked questions section, and if you read that, there's a question that asks, is there a required ratio of out-of-state to in-state students that are accepted? And the school answers, no. However, in the past several years, more than 97% of accepted applicants have been from New Mexico. So if you take that into consideration, if me as a resident from Missouri, if I apply to the University of New Mexico, my chances of getting accepted are not very high, not because of my overall application, but simply because they have a record of not accepting out-of-state students. So look at the schools and whether they're likely to accept you or not based on your state residency. Now, I know that a lot of Texas schools tend to prefer in-state applicants, so definitely check that out when you're trying to narrow down which schools you're applying to. And then the next thing is, of course, your GPA and MCAT requirements. So it is really important that you look at what the requirements of the school are so that you know you are within that range or outside of that range, right? If you are going to apply to a school that has significantly higher GPA and MCAT requirements, then you're less likely to get an acceptance. So for this, I recommend using the MSAR online database, which I will link somewhere below. There you can see all of the schools in one big list. You can filter them out. You can see MCAT and GPA requirements. And then if you don't want to pay for this service, then you can simply go to each individual website for each school and look at their average MCAT scores and GPAs and so on and so forth. Now, I know nowadays most med students end up applying to an average of 15 schools or more. So it definitely, the more you apply to more schools, the more your costs will go up. Now, I wanted to give you an example of what I ended up doing during my second application cycle. So I ended up applying to 12 schools, and you can see I've just generically named those 12 schools without stating their names, but I have also listed the average MCAT. So you can see school 1 had an average MCAT they're looking for of about 505, whereas school 12 had 518. And my MCAT score was a 513. So you can see that I applied to school 1 through 5. They had MCAT ranges that were below my MCAT score. Then schools 6 through 9 had basically my MCAT score. And then the last 3 were above my MCAT score. So typically I'm applying to significantly more schools that are below my MCAT, on target with my MCAT, and then only a few that are above my MCAT. And you can see that I ended up getting 2 interview invites from schools that were below my MCAT, 1 that was on target and turned into an acceptance, and I didn't receive any interview invites from schools that were above my MCAT. You should definitely also include your GPA if you are tracking your schools in this manner. All right, for tip number 3, how can we reduce your interview costs? Now, of course, if your interview is close enough to where you can drive, let's say I would be willing to drive 6 to 7 hours to get to an interview, that will definitely save you a lot more money than flying there. Now, if you do have to fly, I highly recommend you start doing research into credit cards that will give you back points or that have some type of travel benefit, or airline mileage programs. So I really wish that in retrospect I had started looking into those earlier, because if I was racking up points during my undergrad, then I would have been able to use them for my interviews. Now, another thing, let's say that you live on the East Coast and you apply to a bunch of schools on the West Coast. If you end up getting interviews, I highly recommend that you reach out to all of your West Coast schools and you try and communicate with them that you want to group your interviews together so they are basically back to back. This way you can end up buying one flight from the East Coast to the West Coast. That way you don't have to end up flying back and forth, but you fly once, and then because they're all, let's say, a few days within the time span of each other, then you can drive to each of the interviews or basically fly only along the West Coast instead of having to bounce back and forth. Now, when it comes to housing, I always prefer Airbnb over hotels. The first thing is hotels are significantly more expensive, and hotels don't feel like home to me, and Airbnb feels more like home. I have my own kitchen, which allows me to buy my own food, store food, and cook food. So I'm saving this way more on food instead of having to go out, eat out, maybe Uber around and waste more money. Now, another option that some med schools offer is student housing. They will allow you to reach out to their current medical students, and those medical students might be willing to house you in their apartment for free. Now, if medical schools don't offer this to you, still try and find a current medical student through some connection. Reach out to them and ask them, because what's the worst they can say? They can say no, but if they do say yes, then you basically have free housing and you've got somebody to show you around and tell you more about the school. And the last thing when it comes to your interview costs is your professional attire. Now, when it came to my first interview, I actually didn't have any professional attire that was interview appropriate. So I had to go and buy a suit and buy shoes and buy accessories. And these costs can really rack up. Now, the way I like to think of this is that I'm willing to spend $200 to $300 on a really nice suit, or if you're buying a dress or whatever it is, because it's a long-term investment. I'm going to end up using these clothes, in the future when I'm a medical student, in the future when I'm a physician, when I'm a resident, when I'm going to conferences. So I think that it is worth spending that money to invest in professional attire. Now, if you don't have that extra cash, definitely check out thrift stores, check out secondhand stores. I think that there are really good finds there. And if something is too big or too small or too weird, you can always go and get it tailored and it can make a really nice fit. And the last thing that I really like is if you're thinking ahead of time, if you're thinking, I'm a sophomore, but in 2 years, I'm going to need a really nice suit for my interview. Look at holiday sales. So recently after Thanksgiving, I was able to find super, super nice 2 full complete sets of suits at Zara for under $200 because I was targeting the sales. So if you're aware of this, you can really get good deals ahead of time and not waste money at the last minute. Tip number 4, I think, is key. If you have not heard of the AAMC Fee Assistance Program, you need to do your research immediately because this is something that really helped me out, and I think it can help out a lot of other people. So this fee assistance program, basically, if you apply for it and you meet the eligibility criteria, you end up with a lot of benefits that are offered to you. So this is based on financial aid. You will have to provide your parental information, your financial information, and based on that, they will determine if you're eligible for the fee assistance program. Now, don't rule yourself out. You don't know what they're looking for, so I suggest you look into the criteria and apply and see what happens because you might get it. And if you don't get it, at least you tried. So if you do end up getting this program, this assistance program, then what happens is you end up getting an MCAT official prep product bundle from the AAMC. So this is like full practice length exams and flashcards and all of these other resources that are normally at a basically $268 value, but you receive them for free. Your MCAT fee goes from $320 to $130. You get free access to the MSAR online database, so you can look up your GPA, your MCAT stats, and everything, and it's for free, normally at a $36 value. You also get a waiver for all of your MCAS fees for up to 20 medical schools, which is roughly a $1,000 value. So basically, you're not paying for any of your primary applications up to 20 medical schools. After 20 medical schools, you do have to pay an additional $38 as you rack up more and more medical school applications. And then most medical schools will actually, if you have the fee assistance program, they will actually waive your secondary application fees. Most, if not all, schools will. So if you add up the value of all of these things that the program is offering you, you are basically saving $1,500. Now, for me, that's like an entire month of working at a minimum wage job. And I think that month could be much better spent studying on your MCAT. So definitely look into this program. So you can see how it impacted me during my first application cycle. I did have the fee assistance program. I applied to 19 primaries and 15 secondary applications. That was normally a full cost of $2,300, but what I ended up paying was only $152. So at that time, the fee assistance program was covering only 15 medical school applications. So it covered all my 15 primaries, and I only had to pay for 4 primary applications at $38 each. That's how we end up with $152, and all of my secondary application fees were waived by the individual schools. So there you have it. Tip number 5, there are pre-medical scholarships. They exist, I promise you. I know that they are very hard to find, but they exist. They are out there. And as long as you go out there and you look for them, you will find something and you will have the upper hand because you actually looked for it and you found it. So the first step is look at your university. Go talk to your pre-med office, your pre-health club, your pre-med advisor, and ask them if they know of any university-specific scholarships or outside of your university. Okay, so that's the first step. I know that my undergrad, we had a pre-health club that offered a $500 pre-med scholarship. So if there aren't any scholarships at your university, then look at the national level, go online, look up as many resources as you can. Some organizations will offer specific scholarships for students that are minority students, for first generation college students, for students that are interested in a specific field of medicine. So I'm telling you, just go look for them, and they do exist. Now, I do want to tell you about 2 scholarships that you should consider in the future. One of them is out of the medical school headquarters. So they have a scholarship they offer 2 times a year. It is an essay contest, and anybody can apply for it as long as they are on their path to medicine. So if you're an undergrad, if you're in post-bac, if you're applying to med school, you can apply for this scholarship. And they give 3 awards, one at $4,000, one at $1,500, and one at $500. So again, any award at any price will help you reduce your costs. And then the last scholarship is the Med School's Insider Scholarship. They help pre-med and med students that basically have financial needs. So this is an annual scholarship of $1,000. And again, it is an essay contest that is 500-word maximum. If you're interested more in these scholarships, I will link them in my blog in the description below. So here are my final thoughts. This is how you can reduce your application fees. Educate yourself ahead of time, start learning about all of these possibilities, be proactive, and budget. If you know what you're going to have to spend, you can plan for it. So again, if you guys want, I will share my budget for applying to medical school with you so you can track all of your schools, all of your costs, your MCAT fees, and everything. So I will link that in my blog below. Check it out. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like, comment below if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.